Across the shifting centuries, two shadows stride across the map of Eurasia, so immense that even now they seem to darken whole continents. One rises from the rocky hills and coastal plains of ancient Macedon, a kingdom on the edge of the Greek world, where olive groves and mountain passes framed a land long dismissed by the southern city-states as half-barbarian. The other rises from a different horizon entirely, from a sea of grass that rolls in endless waves under a cold sky, the Eurasian steppe, where wind and hunger and tribal war are the first teachers. To follow the lives of Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan is to cross from marble temples to felt tents, from phalanxes with locked shields to horse archers flowing across the plains like a living storm. To ask who among them was the greatest conqueror is not only to compare numbers and territories, but to grasp the worlds that made them, the armies they forged, the empires they shaped, and the enduring costs of their ambition. The world into which Alexander was born had already seen centuries of war, philosophy, and art. The Greek city-states had risen and bled themselves in clashes like the Peloponnesian War, filling the Aegean with memories of triremes, sieges, shifting alliances, and bitter civil strife. South of Macedon, Athens still boasted its philosophers and playwrights, but its political power was fading. Further east, the Persian Empire stretched from Anatolia to the Indus Valley, a mosaic of peoples and satrapies tied together by royal roads, tribute, and the authority of the great king. Macedon itself sat to the north of this older Greek world, a kingdom of hardy farmers and warriors. Its nobility fond of feasts and hunting, its people viewed with suspicion by their southern neighbors. It was a place where mountain air sharpened lungs, where horses were prized, where kings lived not far from their men. Alexander's father, Philip, transformed this marginal kingdom into a spear poised at the heart of the Greek world. Trained as a hostage in Thebes when young, Philip saw the finest Greek hoplite tactics at work and learned how to forge a disciplined army. When he returned to Macedon, he found a realm threatened by enemies and falling apart. With ruthless focus, he reorganized his forces, introduced the long pike called the sarissa, drilled his infantry into the phalanx, and combined them with a powerful cavalry arm led by aristocrats who would ride at the king's side. He reformed finances, exploited mines, and bought loyalty where force could not reach. By a mix of diplomacy, marriage, alliances, and iron, he subdued his neighbors and imposed Macedonian dominance across Greece. Into this unfolding transformation, Alexander was born inside a palace that was also a camp, to a father who was both king and warlord, and a mother, Olympias, whose fierce spirit and deep religious sensibilities would mark him forever. He grew up amidst stories of heroes and gods, listening to tales of Achilles, Heracles, and older mythic figures, absorbing the belief that certain men are destined to bend the world. His education under the philosopher Aristotle gave him not only knowledge of rhetoric, ethics, and natural science, but a sense of the wider world beyond Greece, a world of strange peoples, animals, and lands. In the shade of trees near Mieza, the boy who would one day smash empires learned about logic and poetry, but also about the map of the known world, the location of Persia, the names of rivers and mountains that would later echo under his march. There were signs early of a nature that would not accept limits. The story of the taming of Bucephalus, though polished by later generations, captures something real in its imagery. A great horse, wild and strong, refused all riders, spooking at its own shadow. Men tried to mount it and were thrown. The boy Alexander, noticing its fear of the dark shape at its feet, turned it toward the sun, soothing it until it accepted him. Whether the details are exact or not, the memory points to a youth able to see where others did not, to sense an inner mechanism of fear and to subdue it with confidence. A powerful horse and a boy growing into a young man became one of history's legendary pairs, riding together from Macedon into Asia. When Philip completed his domination of Greece after the Battle of Chaeronea, where the Macedonian phalanx shattered the allied Greek lines, and Alexander himself led a decisive cavalry charge against the Theban sacred band, a new plan emerged. Philip would lead a Panhellenic campaign against Persia, avenging past invasions and uniting the Greeks under his command in a war that would channel their energies outward instead of inward. But before this grand expedition could truly begin, Philip fell to an assassin's blade. In the crowded theater of Aige, amid court intrigues and simmering resentments, he was struck down, leaving behind a son in his late teens and an unfinished plan. Alexander seized the moment with terrifying speed. In a world where the death of a king often meant fragmentation, he moved to secure his throne, eliminating rivals, crushing rebellions in the north, and marching swiftly into Greece to demand recognition as leader of the alliance his father had forged. At Thebes, when the city dared to revolt, he destroyed it, sparing only temples and the house of the poet Pindar, sending a message as clear as any inscription carved in stone. Fear and admiration blended in the hearts of those who watched this young king act with such decisive force. The stage was set. With Greek affairs settled, Alexander turned his gaze eastward, across the Hellespont, toward the empire that had loomed over Greek imagination for generations. To cross that narrow strait was to cross into a different world. Asia Minor stretched ahead, a land of mixed Greek coastal cities and rugged interior satrapies controlled by Persian governors. The Persian Empire, though shaken by internal plots, was still vast and rich, commanded by King Darius, heir to a line that traced back to Cyrus and Xerxes. Against this colossus, Alexander brought an army that was small by Persian standards but honed by years of Macedonian reform. At the river Granicus, near the coast, he met Persian forces for the first time. The river's banks and waters formed a natural obstacle, yet Alexander, rejecting cautious counsel, led his companion cavalry personally into the stream, crashing into the Persian line with a ferocity that stunned his foes. The clash of pikes, swords, and hooves sent spray and blood into the air. Under the weight of his attack, the Persian contingents broke. A path into Asia Minor opened, and Greek cities along the coast began to fall or surrender, some welcoming him as a liberator from Persian rule. The march continued, grains of dust rising under thousands of sandaled feet, standards shifting in the wind, the bronze and steel of armor glinting under the Anatolian sun. At Issus, squeezed between mountains and sea, with a river cutting across the plain, Alexander found himself facing Darius in person. The Persian army stretched across the field, its numbers overwhelming, banners and chariots shimmering behind ranks of infantry. Alexander anchored his right on the rugged terrain and drove his cavalry at the point where he judged the Persian line weakest, seeking not merely to punch a hole, but to pierce toward Darius himself. In the chaos of shrieking men and rearing horses, he saw the royal chariot and hurled his strength at it. The Persian king, realizing the danger, fled, his departure sending ripples of panic through his troops. Victory fell to the Macedonians. The royal family and treasury were captured. The myth of Persian invincibility cracked. Yet for Alexander, Issus was not an end point, but a beginning. He turned south, taking the fortified island city of Tyre after a long siege that saw causeways built through the sea, towers rolled forward, and walls battered until they fell. The echoes of hammer on stone, the crash of collapsing battlements, the screams of defenders, and the roar of assaulting troops filled the air above the Mediterranean waves. In Egypt, he entered as a conqueror and was hailed as a kind of deliverer. He founded a city near the Nile Delta that would bear his name, Alexandria, a future beacon of learning and trade. In the desert, he traveled to the Oracle of Siwa, where he sought confirmation of his divine favor, weaving for himself a story that linked him, in his own mind and that of his followers, to heroic and even godlike ancestry. Then came the march into the heart of Persia, through wide plains and mountain passes, along royal roads, still bearing the impressions of countless prior armies, he advanced toward Gaugamela. There, on a broad expanse, chosen by Darius to maximize the advantage of his cavalry and scythe chariots, the final reckoning took place. The night before, Alexander studied the field, reading its contours as a general reads a text, looking not only at what his eyes could see, but at what his mind could make of space and time. When the sun rose, the air soon filled with dust as armies deployed. The Macedonian phalanxes, those walls of sarissas, bristled like iron fields, while the companions on one wing and the Thessalian cavalry on the other flexed and waited. The Persians came forward in a tide of men and horses, chariots racing ahead with blades jutting from their wheels. Alexander shifted his line obliquely, drawing the Persian center and left out of position, creating a gap. Then he hurled himself and his companions into that gap, driving for Darius once more. The sound of impact echoed in a rolling thunder of hooves, shouts, and metal upon metal. Dust clouds rose, partially veiling the scene, but within them the decisive blow fell. The Persian king again threatened, again fled. The immense machine of empire, robbed of its keystone, began to fall apart. Babylon opened its gates. Susa surrendered its treasures, including a hoard of wealth accumulated over generations. Persepolis, that symbol of Persian royal power, with its stone reliefs of delegations and kings, fell and burned, its halls illuminated by flames that crackled and devoured carved cedar and cedar smoke curling into the night sky as Alexander watched. Whether he regretted the destruction later or saw it as vengeance for earlier Persian desecrations of Greek temples, the fire symbolized for many the passing of an age. Yet conquest is not only about battles won. As Alexander pushed further into Bactria and Sogdia, regions of rugged mountains and scattered fortresses, he faced a different kind of war. No longer was it a matter of set battles on open plains against massive, centralized armies. Instead, he contended with local chieftains, mobile raiders, and the resistance of a proud, semi-nomadic population. There were ambushes in narrow valleys, assaults on remote strongholds clinging to cliffs, relentless marches through harsh winters. The Greeks and Macedonians, more accustomed to the Mediterranean climate, now learned to endure snow and bitter winds to fight enemies who vanished into the landscape when pressed. In these lands, Alexander's vision of empire began to show a dual face. On one side, he married local customs, wearing Eastern dress at times, adopting some Persian court rituals, encouraging his officers to take local wives. On the other, he crushed rebellions with ruthless force, executed recalcitrant leaders, and moved populations. He founded cities bearing his name, planting Greek and Macedonian settlers as seeds of Hellenistic culture across the region. His army, once a relatively compact Macedonian force with allied contingents, became a more complex instrument, blending various peoples, languages, and traditions. The march into India pushed his men and himself to new limits. Through the passes of the Hindu Kush, along monsoon-flooded rivers, into lands of elephants and unfamiliar gods, he went further than any Macedonian king had ever imagined. At the Hydaspes River, he faced King Porus, whose war elephants towered over the battlefield like living towers, their tusks sharpened, their bodies armored. The river itself, swollen and fast, posed a challenge. Alexander feigned crossings, misled the enemy regarding his intentions, and then, in a storm, crossed at an unexpected point, launching his attack in driving rain. The battle saw cavalry, infantry, and elephants clash in a chaos of trumpeting beasts, screaming horses, and clashing steel. Victory eventually tilted toward Alexander, but it was costly and hard-won. When his army reached the Hyphasis River and realized that beyond lay further vast distances, more unknown peoples and lands, the men refused to go on. Years of campaigning, wounds, deaths, homes left behind, and the sheer distance from Macedon converged into a firm refusal. Alexander, furious, tried to shame them, to remind them of how far they had come, of the glory yet to be taken, but even his charisma could not bend men who had reached the end of their endurance. Reluctantly, he turned back, his grand dream of pushing to the ocean curtailed by the finite strength of human bodies and minds. As he returned westward, down the Indus, across Gedrosian deserts where heat and thirst killed more men than enemy spears, Alexander's story moved toward its sudden end. In Babylon, amid new plans for campaigns against Arabia and perhaps beyond, Surrounded by a court that blended Macedonian veterans with Persian nobles and foreign envoys, he fell ill. Fever gripped him. Tales of poison circulate, but the exact cause remains uncertain. What is clear is that the man who had carved a path from Macedon to India in little over a decade died in his early 30s, leaving behind a vast, unstable empire and no clear succession. His generals, those hard men who had ridden and fought with him, soon carved his territories into kingdoms of their own, launching the Hellenistic age but ending the unity he had forged. Neither before nor since had a Macedonian or Greek wielded such power. His conquests spread Greek language and culture deep into Asia, siring cities that became centers of learning and commerce, blending Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and other traditions into new syntheses. He inspired legends among both conquerors and the conquered, sometimes as a model hero, sometimes as a warning. Yet his empire did not endure as a single entity. It fractured, as if to remind the world that some visions, however brilliant, can burn too hot to last. While Alexander's story unfolds under Mediterranean and Near Eastern suns, another story takes shape far to the northeast, under a harsher sky. The Eurasian steppe is a world of grass, wind, and distance. In spring and summer, wildflowers scatter color across the rolling land. Herds of horses and sheep graze under vast skies, and the air smells of grass and smoke from felt tents. In winter, cold sweeps across the plains like a knife, snow piling in drifts, rivers freezing, and hunger biting at the edges of every camp. There are no marble temples here, no stone theaters, no city walls, only the horizon in all directions and the tents and carts of nomadic tribes whose lives depend on their herds, their horses, and their ability to fight. Into this world, in the 12th century of the Christian era, a boy named Temujin was born to a minor clan chieftain. His first experiences were not of settled court life, but of movement, of the feel of a pony's back beneath him at an age when most children elsewhere would barely be walking steadily. He breathed air that smelled of dung fires and leather, slept under felt, and sometimes under the open stars. From an early age, he would have watched men draw composite bows that could send arrows far with deadly force, seen women manage camps and heard stories not of philosophers but of raids, alliances, and betrayals. The steppe was a world of tribes and clans locked in ceaseless competition. Alliances shifted like sand. A friend one year could be a raider the next. Temujin's father, Yesuge, was poisoned by enemies after securing a marriage alliance for his son. With his death, the fragile protections of rank dissolved. Temujin's family was cast out by their own clan, left to fend for themselves along riverbanks, gathering wild plants, fishing, and trapping to survive. Hunger became a constant companion. The boy learned that loyalty could be brittle and that only a few bonds might endure misfortune. Captured at one point by enemies, he experienced the humiliation of being enslaved, a collar placed around his neck, his movements controlled by others. He escaped, aided by a sympathetic member of his captors, and fled back into the world of wind and grass, carrying with him the memory of bondage and a growing resolve never again to be so powerless. Through his teenage and early adult years, he drew around him a small group of companions bound by personal ties. He repaid loyalty fiercely and punished betrayal ruthlessly. Gradually, his sphere of influence widened. He began to appear not merely as another tribal chieftain, but as a figure around whom a different kind of order might be built. Temujin's genius lay not only in his ferocity, but in his ability to reshape steppe society itself. Where older tribal structures relied heavily on kinship, he began to reorganize his followers into units that cut across clan lines. 10 men formed a unit, 10 units formed a larger one, and so on, creating a decimal military structure that broke the old tribal monopolies on power. A man's position depended increasingly on his skill, courage, and loyalty, rather than on birth alone. This reorganization created a more flexible, reliable army, one whose commanders were tied directly to Temujin. Charismatic and terrifying, he mixed generosity with cruelty in a calculated way. Those who joined him early and remained faithful were rewarded with positions and shares of plunder. Those who resisted and then surrendered were sometimes spared and incorporated, Those who betrayed him or persisted in defiance at critical moments faced annihilation. His reputation began to precede him across the steppe. Stories of his victories, his harsh punishments, and his ability to survive against the odds spread among the tribes. After years of struggle, including defeats, retreats, and comebacks, Temujin called a great assembly, a Kurultai, at which he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The title carried with it not only authority over his own tribe, but a claim to rule over all the Mongols. At that moment, the disparate, feuding clans of the Mongolian plateau had been beaten, persuaded, or worn into a new kind of unity. The steppe had, for the first time in generations, a single dominant leader with a reformed, disciplined military machine at his disposal. This army was unlike any that the settled civilizations to the south and west had previously faced. Its core was the mounted archer, a warrior who grew up on horseback, able to ride for days, shoot accurately at full gallop, and live off the land to an astonishing extent. The Mongol composite bow, made of wood, horn, and sinew, had a formidable draw weight and range, retaining killing power at distances where many infantry archers would struggle. Mongol horsemen carried several horses each, allowing them to rotate mounts and sustain a speed that would exhaust other cavalry. Their tactics included encirclements, feigned retreats, and precise maneuvers coordinated across wide spaces, guided by signal flags, smoke, drums, and a tightly organized command structure. Genghis Khan also understood the value of intelligence and communication. He created networks of scouts and spies who probed enemy lands before campaigns, gathering information about terrain, fortifications, and political fissures. He established a system of relay stations that allowed messengers to carry orders and news quickly across long distances. Speed, coordination, and information became as much tools of conquest as bow and sword. His first major campaigns after unification were directed against traditional steppe enemies such as the Tatars and Naimans, whom he defeated with a combination of superior tactics and ruthless policy. The destruction of these tribes was often thorough. Adult males might be killed, while younger, more pliable individuals were folded into his own ranks. Such acts sent ripples of fear through the region. The message was clear. Resistance at certain moments meant not just defeat, but erasure. Turning his gaze south and east, Genghis Khan then confronted the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China and its rich cities. Here, the Mongols faced walls and siege warfare, challenges less familiar to nomads whose strength lay in mobility. Yet, they adapted with striking flexibility. They captured and employed Chinese artisans, engineers, and siege specialists, incorporating their knowledge into the Mongol war machine. Battering rams, catapults, siege towers, and other devices appeared beside cavalry, forming combined operations that could topple fortified cities, long thought impregnable. The capture and sack of cities like Zhongdu, near the site of modern Beijing, sent shockwaves through the region. Flames rose from palaces and markets alike. Walls that had stood for generations were breached. Lives, livelihoods, and cultural treasures vanished in days. The Mongols, having broken the northern shield of the Chinese heartland, secured tribute and control over vast new territories, though the complete conquest of China would be left to Genghis Khan's descendants. It was to the west, however, that one of the most astonishing campaigns unfolded, the destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire, a realm that stretched from Persia into Central Asia and controlled critical segments of the Silk Road. Initially, Genghis Khan sought trade and diplomatic relations. A caravan of merchants and emissaries was sent, carrying goods and peaceful intentions. In a fateful decision, a Khwarezmian governor, suspicious and arrogant, seized the caravan, accusing them of spying, and had many of them killed. When envoys sent to protest were also abused and murdered, the insult was total. Genghis Khan's response was apocalyptic. He assembled perhaps the finest version of his army yet to march and drove it across deserts and mountains toward Khwarezm. Outnumbered on paper by the combined forces of the Khwarezmian Shah, the Mongols compensated with superior mobility, coordination, and psychological warfare. They split into multiple columns, crossing at unexpected points, appearing where they should have been weeks away, City after city fell. Some resisted fiercely, others surrendered quickly, hoping for mercy. What they received depended on timing, circumstances, and the Khan's calculated desire to send messages. Samarkand, Bukhara, and other great centers of Islamic learning and commerce saw Mongol horsemen ride into their streets, their mosques and markets echoing with the thud of hooves. In some cases, entire populations were massacred or enslaved, their fields left unworked, their canals choked with debris. Survivors fled west, carrying stories of a storm from the east that left nothing standing. The Shah, chased by Mongol detachments, fled from city to city, losing control over his empire as he went. Genghis Khan's generals, including brilliant subordinates like Subutai, drove deep into the Caucasus and beyond, scouting routes that others would later use for further campaigns. Under Genghis Khan and his immediate successors, the Mongol Empire would become the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from the shores of the Pacific to the plains of Eastern Europe, encompassing a staggering diversity of lands, climates, and peoples. From the russet walls of Chinese fortresses to the minarets of Central Asian towns, from the forests of Rus to the mountains near Persia, the hoofbeats of Mongol horses resounded. A man born in a felt tent on the steppe now commanded a realm that dwarfed any earlier empire in sheer geographic scope. To compare Alexander and Genghis, it is necessary to move, in the mind's eye, back and forth between their worlds. Picture Alexander's phalanx, shields braced, spears thrust forward in bristling ranks. Each soldier carries a long pike, a small shield, armor, and a helmet, standing shoulder to shoulder with comrades in a tight formation that advances like a moving wall. Behind and around them, cavalry waits, heavy horsemen with spears ready to exploit openings. They fight often on relatively defined fields where two armies agree, implicitly or explicitly, to meet and settle matters in set pieces. Now picture Genghis Khan's mounted archers, riding light horses, wearing lamellar armor or thick leather, quivers full of arrows at their hips. They move in loose formations, spreading out across the steppe, communicating with signals, surrounding enemy forces and pelting them with arrows from a distance. They perform feigned retreats, galloping away as if defeated, drawing opponents into pursuit, only to wheel and unleash volleys into their disordered ranks. Where the Macedonian phalanx is a dense, disciplined block, the Mongol host is a swirling, fluid mass, hard to pin down, dangerous at range. Alexander's genius lies in his ability to combine the iron solidity of the phalanx with the shock of cavalry. At Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, he reads terrain and enemy disposition with uncanny speed, placing his phalanx where it can hold and his cavalry where it can strike. He leads from the front, often within javelin range, visible to his men as he plunges into the heart of the enemy. His soldiers, seeing him fully exposed, are inspired to follow. His battles are theaters where personal courage and tactical insight intertwine. Genghis Khan's genius lies in recognizing that the steppe way of war can be converted into an instrument capable of breaking even fortified empires. He systematizes what had long been individual tribal habits. Feigned retreats, once the tricks of smaller warbands, become doctrine. He integrates siege technology, foreign specialists, and intelligence networks into a nomadic army, turning mobility into more than just fast raids. His own presence on the field is central, but he also delegates brilliantly, trusting capable generals to conduct far-flung operations while he coordinates the overall design. In terms of cultural policy, Alexander often leans toward assimilation. He establishes cities and populates them with Greeks and locals, encourages intermarriage, adopts elements of Persian dress and ceremonies. He sees himself, at least in part, as forging a new kind of world where Greek language and culture will mix with those of the lands he conquers. His founding of Alexandria in Egypt and other Alexandrias across Asia creates nodes of Hellenistic influence from which art, philosophy, and commerce radiate for centuries. Genghis Khan, while open to employing capable individuals from conquered peoples, is less interested in cultural fusion in the Greek sense. His empire, at least in his lifetime, remains rooted in the steppe ethos, the supremacy of the Mongol ruling class, the maintenance of a nomadic heart even as cities fall under his shadow. He is pragmatic about religion, often granting a degree of tolerance to various faiths as long as they do not threaten his rule or refuse to pay tribute. Yet the cultural imprint of the Mongols on sedentary civilizations is more about administrative pragmatism and the forced opening of long-distance trade routes than about the spread of a specific Mongol high culture comparable to Hellenism. Psychologically, the two men offer fascinating contrasts. Alexander is steeped in the literature and ideals of the Greek world. He dreams of heroic glory, of surpassing Achilles and Heracles, of writing his name across horizons that his ancestors had only imagined. He exhibits intense emotional swings, moments of generosity and passionate friendship, episodes of rage and paranoia. He can weep at the sight of Indian philosophers confronting him with the limits of human ambition, yet order the killing of close companions like Clytus in a drunken fit. His sense of self borders on the cosmic. He increasingly sees his life as entwined with divine destiny, a story that must keep expanding until the world itself runs out. Genghis Khan's inner world is formed in the crucible of tribal survival. His early experiences of betrayal, abandonment, and captivity harden him. He rarely has the luxury of pure heroic contemplation. His focus is relentlessly practical, though not devoid of a sense of destiny. He is deeply spiritual in his own way, honoring the eternal blue sky, seeking omens, consulting shamans, yet his spirituality is bound tightly to the success of the Mongols as a people. His ambitions, while grand, are framed less in terms of copying mythic heroes from literature and more in terms of ensuring that his people will never again be weak and divided prey for others. In their treatment of allies and enemies, shades of similarity and difference emerge. Alexander can be magnanimous. At times, he honors defeated kings, incorporates them into his retinue, or marries into their families. At other times, he exacts severe reprisals, razing cities that resist too long or that betray him. His policy is often ad hoc, influenced by mood, counsel, and the strategic message he wishes to send. He is capable of genuine admiration for courage in others, even in enemies. Genghis Khan can also be surprisingly fair to those who submit early and loyally. Entire cities that open their gates quickly may be spared wholesale slaughter, their elites co-opted, their skilled workers spared and redeployed. Yet his punishments for defiance, especially when combined with betrayal of envoys or resistance after a promise of peace, are legendary in their scale. Stories of pyramids, of skulls, and burned fields accompany his name across Western Asia. Where Alexander's wrath might fall on specific strategic examples like Thebes, Genghis Khan uses terror on a more massive and mechanized scale as a tool to break resistance preemptively. Their visions of empire also diverge. Alexander's is intensely personal and visionary. He sees a world linked by Greek culture, stretching from the Mediterranean to the edges of India, populated by mixed elites speaking a common language, trading across borders, sharing philosophical and artistic traditions. Whether such a world could truly be created in the violent conditions of the ancient Near East remains an open question, but he moves unmistakably in that direction. His death leaves this project half-fashioned, a scaffolding of cities and alliances without its central architect. Genghis Khan's empire is more structurally durable. By creating strong institutions of communication, law, and administration, he lays foundations that his sons and grandsons can use to extend Mongol power further. The so-called Pax Mongolica that emerges in later decades allows merchants from Europe to travel to China under the protection of Mongol authority, knitting together Eurasia in ways previously impossible. Yet this order rests on constant military readiness and the subordination of many peoples to a ruling nomadic elite. It is stable as long as Mongol unity and capacity for violence remain high. Over time, as different branches of his descendants adopt local religions and customs, and as central authority weakens, the empire fragments. But its structural impact on trade and communication persists. In sheer geographic terms, Genghis Khan's empire is larger, dwarfing the area Alexander conquered. It stretches over deserts, mountains, forests, and plains in a continuous sweep. Alexander's conquests, by contrast, though massive for their time, run in a long band from Greece to India, with significant depth but less breadth compared to the later Mongol domains. Measured in speed of conquest, both men are astonishing. Alexander races across Asia in just over a decade. Genghis Khan and his immediate successors carve out their empire in similarly compressed spans, though with a more sustained expansion after his death. In terms of long-term cultural influence, however, Alexander's legacy casts a different kind of light. The spread of Greek language and institutions into Egypt, the Levant, Mesopotamia, and beyond creates the Hellenistic world, in which cities like Alexandria, Antioch, and Seleucia become cauldrons of intellectual life. Philosophy, science, art, and religion mingle there. Later conquerors, including the Romans, operate within a world already colored by Alexander's diffusion of Greekness. His image appears in later literature and art in multiple civilizations, sometimes as a model of universal kingship, sometimes as a cautionary tale. Genghis Khan's legacy is etched more in the realms of statecraft, warfare, and the opening of global networks. Techniques of steppe warfare, the importance of mobility, the value of intelligence, and the use of terror as a psychological weapon all become part of the repertoire of later generals and states. The routes that merchants take under Mongol protection lay groundwork for exchanges of goods, ideas, and even diseases across continents. Some polities that rise in the later medieval and early modern periods build consciously or unconsciously on the administrative patterns forged in the Mongol period. His personal image, however, remains deeply polarizing. In some cultures, he is remembered as a national founding hero. In others, as the embodiment of destruction. Standing at the edge of these two lives, one can imagine the dust of cavalry rising on two very different plains. On one, near Gaugamela, the Macedonian phalanx advances under a hot Mesopotamian sun, shields locked, spears angled, the ground trembling under the combined advance of infantry and cavalry. Persian chariots charge their wheels, throwing clods of earth and sparks, while Darius watches from a chariot, banners snapping behind him. The noise is a deafening mixture of metal, voices, and the whinnying of animals. Above it all, Alexander rides at the head of his companions, eyes fixed on the shifting lines, calculating where to strike. On another, on the open steppe, Mongol horsemen ride in long lines, their arrows already nocked. The air is sharp and cold. The grass sways under the hooves of thousands of horses, dust plumes rising in great clouds that drift for miles. Ahead lies a Russian or Central Asian host, dense and less mobile, banners of different principalities fluttering. Genghis Khan, or one of his great generals, watches, gives a brief signal, and the Mongol lines split, some racing forward to shower the enemy with arrows, others looping out to the flanks. Feigned retreats draw parts of the enemy force into pursuit until they are isolated and surrounded. The sounds are of bowstrings snapping, arrows hissing, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, and the eerie whistling of specially shaped arrowheads designed to sow fear. The psychological demands on the two men, though expressed differently, share some common core. Both bear the weight of entire peoples. Both see themselves as instruments of something larger, whether the will of a god or the destiny of a nation. Both must make decisions that will result in the deaths of tens of thousands, if not more. Both live with the knowledge that hesitation at the wrong moment can doom everything they have built. In private, one can imagine Alexander haunted by the limits of human life. He achieves so much, so quickly, that the world itself begins to feel small around him. He cries, according to later tradition, at the thought that there may be no more worlds to conquer, a gesture that, whether literally true or not, captures the restless hunger inside him. He cannot bear the idea of stopping, of growing old in one place. His march is not only outward, but inward, an attempt to outrun mortality. When sickness stops him, it feels less like a natural end and more like a cosmic interruption. Genghis Khan, by contrast, grows old enough to see more of the arc of a life. He knows hardship, exile, and victory, and he lives long enough to witness his sons and generals carrying his standards beyond his immediate grasp. Near the end, He reportedly laments that his work is incomplete, but there are still lands unconquered, enemies unbroken. Yet the structure he leaves behind is more capable of enduring without him. His sense of destiny is tied to the Mongol people as a whole. Even his burial reflects the steppe ethos. Likely hidden and unmarked, his grave lost, the man returning to the land without monumental stone to declare his greatness. To ask which of these two was the greatest conqueror is to ask what one values in conquest. If sheer size of empire and lasting transformation of continental scale routes are the measure, Genghis Khan's achievements are staggering. If one weighs the fusion of cultures, the deliberate seeding of cities that would become beacons of learning, and the iconic image of a single individual performing improbable feats in battle after battle, Alexander's star glows fiercely. If one considers the intensity of personal charisma, Alexander's presence on the battlefield, shining in bronze amidst his men, inspires as few have ever done. If one considers the capacity to reshape a society from within and create a military system that could be used by successors to continue expansion long after the founder's death, Genghis Khan's reforms stand out. Their shadows still lie on the lands they traversed. In Central Asia, ruins bear silent witness to Mongol destruction, but also to the later flourishing of trade and culture under Mongol patronage. In the Middle East and Eastern Europe, memories of Mongol invasions linger in chronicles and folk tales. In the Caucasus and on the Russian plains, the Mongol period marks a deep imprint on the evolution of states and identities. Along the Silk Road, the Mongol era remains a chapter of openness and danger combined. In Greece, Egypt, and the Near East, the name of Alexander is tied to cities, legends, and hybrid cultures. The Hellenistic kingdoms that rose from his empire shaped the environment into which Rome expanded, influenced Jewish thought in the diaspora, and created cultural frameworks within which early Christianity spread. Statues, coins, and texts carry his profile, his name, his exploits, becoming models for how later rulers imagined universal monarchy. Even in regions he never reached, stories of a far-wandering conqueror find their way into local lore, sometimes merging with native heroes. Ultimately, the fascination with comparing Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan lies less in declaring a single victor than in recognizing that both men stand at the intersection of individual will and historical forces. They are products of their worlds and shapers of them, moving within constraints, yet bending them. Their conquests brought immense suffering, the destruction of cities, the deaths of countless innocents, and the upending of old orders. Yet, they also forged new connections, spread ideas, technologies, and forms of governance that would echo far beyond their lifetimes. To contemplate them is to confront the ambivalence of conquest itself. On one side, there is the undeniable brilliance of strategic genius, the courage of men who lead from the front, the exhilaration of achievement on a scale few can even imagine. On the other, there is the trail of bones stretching behind their armies, the voices of those who lost homes, families, and futures beneath the hooves of their horses and the tramp of their soldiers. Greatness in conquest is inseparable from great destruction. In the hush that follows their campaigns, after the dust of cavalry has settled, after the dying cries have faded and the fires have burned down to ash, a different kind of sound emerges. It is the murmur of survivors rebuilding, of merchants loading caravans for reopened routes, of scholars debating in the libraries of cities founded or spared by their decisions, of storytellers recounting deeds of glory and terror around hearths. It is the sound of history absorbing their violence and weaving it into new patterns. Alexander dies young, leaving an empire that splinters, yet his cultural legacy endures in stone, script, and language. Genghis Khan dies, having welded a people into a conquering machine that persists and expands, yet his own grave disappears into the earth, his bones resting somewhere under the same sky that watched his first rides as a hungry boy. Both, in their very different ways, push the boundaries of the possible for human ambition and power. Both leave behind not only altered maps, but altered imaginations. To ask who was the greatest conqueror is, perhaps, to be drawn to the idea that history can yield a clear verdict, a single name to crown as supreme. Yet the deeper one looks, the more the question transforms. It becomes instead an invitation to explore how environments shape leaders, how technology and organization translate into imperial reach, how personality and ideology color the uses of force, and how the costs of conquest ripple outward through time. In this sense, the question remains fascinating not because it promises a final answer, but because in asking it, we hold up a mirror to our own thoughts about power, destiny, and the meaning of greatness. Under the sun of Mesopotamia and under the cold stars of the Mongolian plateau, horses once thundered, armor once clashed, and voices once shouted, commands that changed the fate of millions. Those echoes have long since faded from the air, but they remain in chronicles, in ruins, in the memories of cultures shaped by those shocks. In that lingering resonance, Alexander and Genghis Khan still stride across the mental map of history, not as simple heroes or villains, but as towering, troubled figures whose lives force us to reckon with what happens when a single human will, sharpened by circumstance, is given the chance to try to seize the world.